I always believed that turning 35 meant slowing down, learning to be content with fewer thrills and more routine. But I never imagined I'd feel so out of sync with my own husband. He's a good man, don't get me wrong. Steady, reliable, the kind of man who enjoys the comfort of predictability. But at 52, that predictability has turned into sluggishness, both in body and in spirit. He barely makes it up to the second floor of our house without wheezing. Meanwhile, I still feel alive. Like my best years are just beginning, not behind me. Then there's my son, Max. Max is 18 now. 18 and already a man. Sometimes I catch myself watching him as he moves through the house, full of energy, like a fire that never burns out. He's athletic, confident, and endlessly in motion. The girls swoon over him at the gym, at school, even at the grocery store. And me? I can't help but admire that spark in him, the one I once had and still crave. Last weekend, my husband left on a fishing trip with his friends. I didn't argue. What would be the point? I hate fishing. The thought of being stuck on a creaky boat for hours, surrounded by the smell of bait and stale beer, was enough to make me flinch. But once the door clicked shut behind him, I felt oddly hollow, like I was the one who'd been left behind. That's when Max walked in. He was sweaty from his morning run, shirt tossed casually over his shoulder, hair damp and cheeks flushed from the June sun. I must have looked glum because he stopped and tilted his head. "You okay, Mom?" I smiled, a weak, tired thing. "Yeah. Just bored, I guess." He narrowed his eyes like he was sizing me up. "You want to come out with me today? I've got something fun planned." I blinked. "With you?" He laughed. "Yeah, with me. Come on, it'll be good for you." He didn't even tell me where we were going. Just said, "Where's something you can move in?" I didn't ask questions. Maybe I just wanted to be surprised. Maybe I needed to feel like someone still saw me, like I wasn't just the woman waiting for the kettle to whistle. An hour later, we were driving down winding country roads with the windows down, music pulsing through the speakers. Max had this sparkle in his eyes, the same one he used to get when he was 5, and convinced we should build a spaceship in the backyard. We ended up at a hiking trail. Not too long, he promised, but scenic. And he was right. It was one of those trails that snuck up on you with its beauty, thick with pine trees and bursts of wildflowers along the edges. I hadn't laughed that much in ages. We raced up hills, skipped rocks across a stream, and at one point he offered me his hand to help me climb a boulder. I hesitated, then placed my palm in his. It was warm, strong, familiar, and yet somehow different. When we reached the overlook, the sun was just beginning to dip, setting the valley below ablaze in amber and gold. Max sat beside me on the rock, his arm brushing mine. "See," he said, flashing that grin. "Told you this would be better than moping around at home." I smiled, catching my breath. "You were right." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something about the way his eyes softened made my heart trip over itself. It wasn't the gaze of a boy who needed his mom. It was something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. Not yet. But in that moment, with the sun warming our faces and the sound of birds settling into the trees, I felt more alive than I had in years. And I knew this was just the beginning. The view stretched endlessly before us, golden light spilling over the tops of trees and painting the landscape in a kind of quiet majesty. I thought we were just going to sit there in companionable silence, soaking it in. But Max turned to me with an unexpected seriousness in his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice low. "Of course." He looked down at his hands for a moment, fingers threading together, as if the words were heavy. "How are you doing with Dad?" The question settled between us like a pebble dropped into still water, rippling outward. I hesitated, unsure how honest I could be. "We're okay," I replied cautiously. He gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to sugarcoat it, Mom. I see things. I've seen how quiet it's gotten between you two." I looked away, the horizon suddenly harder to focus on. Max reached out and gently touched my arm. "You know, I've always thought we're more alike than people realize." I turned back to him, surprised. I mean, he continued, you're full of life. You're curious, energetic, playful. Just like me. The wind stirred around us, soft and warm. He looked down again, then said it. Dad's not that. Not anymore. And I think that's hard for you. I think you miss having someone who wants to explore, who wants to live, really live. My chest tightened. I'm not saying this to upset you, he added quickly. I feel for you. I really do. And then he did something unexpected. He wrapped an arm around me, slow and gentle, and pulled me into him. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was warm, intentional, protective. You deserve more than silence, he murmured near my ear. I sat stiffly at first, unsure of how to react to the sudden closeness. But the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder, the solid strength of his embrace, it soothed something raw inside me. Then, with a tenderness I hadn't felt in a long time, he pressed his lips to my temple. A quiet kiss, just a whisper of warmth, a small gesture, but it sent a jolt through me I hadn't expected. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Because in that moment, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a woman who had been seen. He didn't say anything after that. Just held me as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned shades of lavender and rose. And for a long time we sat like that, still, quiet, connected in a way that felt new and yet oddly familiar. I didn't know what it meant, or where this was heading, but something had shifted between us. And I knew we couldn't go back to how things were before. Eventually, the sun dipped below the hills, casting the trail in a dusky twilight. We knew we had to head back before darkness fully settled. Max stood first, brushing off his jeans, then extended his hand to help me up. I smiled, taking it, still feeling the lingering warmth of his earlier embrace. But as we began the descent, the trail that had felt so gentle on the way up now seemed steeper, littered with loose rocks and unexpected dips. And then it happened. One misplaced step. A sharp slip. My ankle twisted beneath me, and I cried out as I tumbled forward, catching myself just before hitting the ground. Mom. Max was beside me in an instant, crouching down, eyes wide with concern. I clutched my leg, the pain radiating up through my shin like fire. Every movement sent fresh waves of it spiraling through me. I think I twisted it bad, I said through clenched teeth, my voice tight with the effort not to cry. Max didn't hesitate. Without another word, he slid one arm beneath my legs, the other around my back, and before I could protest, he had lifted me into his arms. Max, I started, embarrassed and overwhelmed. Don't even try to argue, he said, his voice low and firm. And just like that, he began the trek down the mountain trail, carrying me as if I weighed nothing. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders instinctively, my cheek pressed against his chest, his heart steady beneath my ear. The pain was still there, but something else began to bloom too, a feeling I couldn't quite name. I felt small in his arms, cared for, protected in a way I hadn't felt in years. I could feel the muscles in his arms, the strength in his stride, and how carefully he adjusted his steps so I wouldn't jostle. Every now and then, I glanced up at his face, focused, determined, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow catching the fading light. I had never seen him like this before. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man. Strong, capable, quietly heroic. When we finally reached the base of the trail, he gently set me down on a bench near the parking lot, kneeling in front of me to examine my swollen ankle. I'm calling a doctor first thing in the morning, he said, brushing my hair out of my face with surprising tenderness. But tonight, I'm taking care of you. And he did. He supported me into the car with the kind of attentiveness that made my heart ache. Back at home, he helped me out of my shoes, brought me an ice pack, and made me tea just the way I liked it. Every little detail, every thoughtful glance, was filled with quiet affection. Lying there on the couch, my ankle elevated and wrapped, I watched him move through the kitchen, this tall, confident young man who had carried me, literally and otherwise, through one of my weakest moments. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to be strong. because someone else was being strong for me. And I couldn't help but wonder what this new closeness meant. What it would mean tomorrow. The next morning, Max was already up before me, padding quietly around the house to avoid waking me. My ankle was still sore, but the swelling had gone down thanks to his constant care. I was curled up on the couch, a soft blanket over my lap, my leg propped on a pillow, when the door suddenly burst open. My husband had returned. He was beaming, practically glowing with excitement as he lugged a cooler into the kitchen, dripping water across the floor. "You wouldn't believe the catch we had this time," he called out, his voice booming through the house. "Biggest pike I've ever pulled." I watched him for a moment.
He didn't look at me.
Not really. His eyes skimmed over the room, pausing briefly on my elevated leg, but no concern, no questions. Just that same old focus on his own little world. "You okay?" he asked vaguely, cracking open a soda and rummaging for his phone, still grinning. "Sprained my ankle," I replied softly. He muttered. "You should rest that." "So, you should have seen the one that got away." I didn't respond. Max walked in from the kitchen then, carrying a fresh cold compress. Without a word, he kneeled beside me, gently unwrapping the bandage, inspecting the bruising with furrowed brows. "Still sore?" he asked. "Less than yesterday," I murmured, my eyes never leaving his face. He nodded, wrapping the cloth with care, his fingers warm and patient. His touch was so different, deliberate, tender, filled with awareness. My husband was still in the kitchen, now loudly talking into his phone with one of his fishing buddies. Max disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes, then returned with 2 steaming plates of pasta, the aroma rich and inviting. He'd made it from scratch, adding just the right amount of garlic and parmesan, remembering exactly how I liked it. He sat beside me, not too close, but enough that I could feel his presence. We ate quietly, the soft clink of forks against plates the only sound between us. His shoulder brushed mine once, and I didn't move away. Then, after we'd eaten, he leaned in slightly, his voice low and close, just enough that I felt the breath of his words tickle my ear. "I like taking care of you," he whispered. "You're so good, so beautiful, so dear to my soul." My breath caught. I turned slowly to face him. His eyes weren't teasing. They were sincere, full of something I hadn't let myself name, something growing, waiting, hovering just below the surface. My chest ached, not from pain, from the weight of being seen,
From the tenderness of it.
from the realization that the connection we'd stumbled into had become something more. And I wasn't sure what to do with that. But I didn't pull away.
Not then.
Not yet. The afternoon sun poured softly through the windows, warming the living room in golden light. I had spent the day on the couch, reading, dozing, and watching Max move through the house with a quiet rhythm, checking on me, folding blankets, tidying up the kitchen. Every movement felt like a secret act of affection. Then he appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs. "Hey," he said, "wanna have coffee outside?" I blinked, surprised but charmed. "I would love to," I said with a smile, "but I can't exactly hobble down the porch steps right now." He tilted his head, that boyish grin spreading across his face. "That's not a problem." Before I could ask what he meant, he was already pouring the coffee into a thermos mug, slipping on his shoes, and making his way over to me. "Come on," he said, turning his back to me and crouching down. "Climb on." "What?" "I'm serious." "Hop on." "Max," I laughed, shaking my head. "You can't carry me everywhere." "I want to," he said simply. And that was that. I slid my arms around his shoulders, wrapping myself onto his back, as gently as I could manage. He adjusted his grip beneath my legs, rising to full height with such ease it took my breath away. "You're not heavy," he murmured as he stepped carefully toward the door. "You're just right." We moved slowly down the steps and out into the yard, the sunlight wrapping us in warmth, the spring breeze tugging at the loose tendrils of my hair. Max settled me onto a cushioned bench beneath the old maple tree, setting the thermos into my hands like a treasured offering. Then he sat down beside me and poured himself a cup. "You're ridiculous," I said, chuckling softly. "You're smiling," he countered. "I can't help it," I admitted. He leaned back, one arm draped along the bench behind me, not quite touching me, but close. Close enough that the distance between us felt deliberate, charged. And in that moment, something washed over me, a wave of affection so warm, so full, that I leaned forward, wrapped my arms gently around his neck from behind, and pressed a kiss to his cheek. He froze for a moment, surprised. Then he turned slightly, eyes meeting mine, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You just made my whole day," he said. And then, beneath the quiet rustle of leaves and the lingering scent of coffee, he reached for my hand and held it. Not as a son would, but as someone who had found something precious. Something he didn't want to let go. The coffee had cooled in our mugs, but neither of us moved to refill them. The sun dipped lower, casting long, soft shadows across the grass. Max sat close beside me on the garden bench, his thigh pressing against mine, warm and solid. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of glances, quiet breaths, things unspoken. I turned my head slightly, catching his gaze. "You know," I whispered, my voice trembling just a bit, "I feel like you love me. Not just as your mom." He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he reached up and touched my cheek. His thumb brushed gently along the curve of my face, as if memorizing its shape. "I do," he said softly. "More than I should, but I do." A long pause followed, heavy with everything we weren't supposed to say. He looked down for a moment, sighing. "I'm sorry I dragged you up that hill," he murmured. "If I hadn't, you wouldn't have hurt your ankle." I shook my head, smiling gently. "Don't apologize. It was worth every step for what I got to feel with you. For how you looked at me. For how you carried me down. For how you've been taking care of me like no one else has in a very long time." He closed his eyes for a moment, nodding slowly, his jaw tight. I touched his hand. "We probably shouldn't feel this way," I said, "but we do. And no matter how wrong it might seem to others, I can't pretend it isn't real." We sat in that fragile honesty, exposed but unafraid. Later, Max took me to the doctor. He helped me into the clinic with that same quiet devotion he had shown since the moment I fell. The sprain wasn't serious, just enough to need rest, some compression, and continued ice. He took every word from the doctor, like it was sacred law. Afterwards, he suggested we celebrate the good news. "Ice cream?" he said, that teasing grin returning. "You've earned it." So we found a little spot near the park and sat on a bench, 2 scoops each, the sun still warm on our shoulders. He picked pistachio. I picked vanilla with caramel swirl. We laughed like old friends, like new lovers, like something in between. He teased me, smearing a little dollop of caramel across the tip of my nose. "Max." I squealed, laughing, trying to wipe it off with the back of my hand. He leaned in with a wicked grin. "Hold still." And he wiped it gently himself, his thumb pausing just a heartbeat too long against my skin. Then he offered me a bite of his ice cream, slowly raising the spoon to my lips. I opened my mouth, and he watched me taste it, his eyes never leaving mine. Something shifted between us again, this unspoken spark crackling to life. I reached for his cone in return, slipping it from his hand and lifting it toward his mouth. But just before he could take a bite, I pulled it back with a playful smirk.
He laughed.
"You're terrible." "You started it," I whispered. And then the moment narrowed. The sounds of the park faded. All I could see was him. The way his smile softened. The way his eyes searched mine. And without thinking, without planning, our faces inched closer. Closer still. And then we kissed. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was slow, aching, like the release of something that had been building for days, maybe longer. His hand found my waist. My fingers curled against his chest. The world held its breath. When we finally pulled apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching, both of us trembling just a little. I don't know what happens next, I said quietly. Neither do I, he whispered. But I want to find out with you. And for once, I didn't feel scared. I felt found.